We are presently studying the divided kingdom of ancient Israel. And last year, about this time, we entered into a study where we were talking about the United Kingdom under the kings Saul, David, and Solomon. And as last week, when we introduced this particular class study, we talked about Solomon and all of his glory. We reminded ourselves of just how special he was as a king, how blessed he was by God. And God, of course, blessed him primarily because he appreciated the heart of Solomon during the early part of his life. He appreciated the prayer of Solomon. Remember, Solomon prayed that he might be granted wisdom to rule God's people effectively. And then we also would note that along the way, as he got older, he turned his heart away from God. You know, there are many people who, as they get older, they're drawn closer to God. And shouldn't that be the desire of every one of us? I know a lot of people, as they get older, say, you know, I look back on some things I did at one time in my life, and I'm ashamed of those things, but I trust in God's forgiveness, and I'm moving forward. I'm getting stronger every day. Isn't that the way the Apostle Paul lived his life? He put those things that he did in the past behind him. He pressed on toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Solomon has reversed this, where he started out pleasing unto God, and then as he gets older, he's departed from the living God. And what is a primary reason for this? Foreign wives, was it? His foreign wives. Now, as I've said before, I believe one reason that Solomon brought in all of these wives was because that helped solidify his standing among the nations of the world at that time, didn't it? He was a wealthy man. He was a powerful man. And God's people reached their zenith under Solomon as far as ever being considered any type of power. And Solomon, of course, was so well respected and envied by some, and the queen of the south, the queen of Sheba, would come, and she said, why, the half's not even been told when you consider King Solomon and his reign. But the text says in 1 Kings 11, where we're going to begin tonight, that King Solomon loved many strange women. That is, he had many foreign wives, some 700 wives, 300 concubines added to that. That was his large harem. And we read there of all the different groups from which he obtained wives. And so that led him away from God, because he began to establish altars, places of worship. Idol worship was introduced by Solomon so he could please these wives. And so he was no longer walking in the steps of his father, right? King David. Now remember, it's very prominent, the sin of David. And we don't gloss over that because the Bible doesn't. But remember, David was all of a sudden caught in a particular act, and he then ultimately repented of what he did with Bathsheba, and then devoted the rest of his life to serving the Lord. But what happened with Solomon was gradual, wasn't it? It was happening over a long period of time. And these wives turned his heart away from God. And look at verse 6. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Now, as a result of this, God says, I'm going to rend the kingdom. It's going to be divided. And so our class study, from now until whenever, is going to be the divided kingdom. And it could go a long time, but I'm not going to let that happen. But here's what I want us to do tonight in this abbreviated class. I want us just to think about why the kingdom divided, okay? And that will serve as a stepping stone toward the rest of our study. It will be foundational to our study. Why did God rend the kingdom from Solomon, who was responsible for the division? And then that will help us to understand more about the various kings that we will study as we continue through the book of 1 and 2 Kings. Now, we know that this happened. We know that God said to Solomon, I'm not going to rend the kingdom while you're the king. And he said that because he just appreciated Solomon so much, right? No, he's already turned against Solomon, or may I say Solomon has turned against God. God said, I'm not going to rend the kingdom from you, it will be your son. All right? And the reason that I'm not going to rend the kingdom from you is because of your father. Because of David, I will not rend the kingdom from you. And he says, I'm not going to take it all away. He says in verse 13, he said, I'll give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen. All right? And then what happens is this. They're adversaries. The text says God raised up adversaries to Solomon. Well, Solomon had depended upon the Lord, right? Now remember, when God said there'll come a time that Israel want a king, if they have a king, I'm going to tell them what kind of king they're going to have. And he's going to have to follow some specific instructions. Among those instructions, do not have foreign wives. Among the instructions, don't have a multiplicity of horses. That is, don't have a great big army, because that shows you're not depending upon me. Did Solomon violate those two commands? Yes, he did. And so we now have other adversaries of Solomon. Hadad the Edomite, Rezon of Syria. They're going to come and they're going to fight against Solomon. And so he's not going to have peace anymore. He had peace. No more peace. And furthermore, the prophets of God are going to come after him because of what he's done. So whenever we think about the rending of Israel, the division of Israel, Solomon, you can't forget Solomon. He played the primary role because of his sin, because of his attitude toward God, because of his violation of divine decree. That's the reason that the kingdom is going to be divided. But let's bring somebody else in to this discussion, and his name is Jeroboam. Jeroboam. Now, you're going to find that there's going to be a battle between Jeroboam and Rehoboam, a political battle. Now, really, the battle's already been decided, hasn't it? And God is going to work through both of these to accomplish his will. And we're going to see through our study of Jeroboam and Rehoboam how that God can work out his divine will just as he's decreed. All right? And so here is a man named Jeroboam. He's called the son of Nebat. He's from up in Ephraim. And Ahijah, the prophet, in private, just like Samuel had said to David, you're going to be the king. There's going to be a rending of the kingdom, and most of these tribes are going to be under your command. All right? Now, what happened when David was told that? David just kept to himself, didn't he? David just kept on being loyal to God's anointed, right? Oh, here's your opportunity, David. Raise your hand against God's anointed. Not going to do it. Saul's God's anointed. I'll wait in God's own time and let him fulfill what he wants in me. Well, Jeroboam's not like that. Jeroboam's not the righteous man David was. And so Jeroboam, he conspires against Solomon. Jeroboam is one who is going to, based upon his excitement to be the king, he's going to undermine King Solomon. And ultimately, he's going to stand in opposition to Rehoboam. What he needs to do is just wait and let the Lord determine this. The Lord already has determined it. Let the Lord work it out, as the Lord is going to work it out. And so we find that in 1 Kings chapter 27, that you have Solomon having put a lot of authority in the hands of Jeroboam. And Jeroboam is one who, the text says in verse 28, is a mighty man of valor. And Solomon saw that he was industrious, and he gave him a position of authority. And then right after that comes Ahijah saying to Jeroboam, look, I want you to know something. You're going to be the new king. And here's how he demonstrated. Ahijah caught this particular garment. Look at verse 29. It came to pass at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem that the prophet of Ahijah, the Shilonite, found him in the way, and he clad himself with a new garment, and they two were alone. And Ahijah caught that new garment that was on him, and he rent it in 12 pieces, didn't he? How many did he tell him to take? 10 of them, right? You take 10 of them. And here's what that illustrates. You're going to have 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel under your command. And verse 32, one tribe will be remain for Solomon's heir, out of respect, of course, for David. And then he tells Jeroboam why this is going to happen. Well, it appears that with Jeroboam, who, by the way, Jeroboam did not like the compulsory labor laws of Solomon. Now, Solomon is the king. He's trying to maintain control of the people. But remember, old Jeroboam is a populist, okay? Put that in modern terms, all right? You've got those over here who think let government do everything, and then you got those over here who says we're the people, we're the people's voice, right? We're the populist. And so Solomon over here, he's what? He's the monarch, he's the king, he rules with authority. And don't lift up a finger against him. And when Rehoboam comes along, he's going to have the same attitude as his father, even worse. But here's Jeroboam over here. He's concerned about the people, particularly up there in Ephraim. And Ephraim, don't forget, Ephraim was a tribe of great pride. But they've lost their influence since David became king. Because when you go back there to the book of Joshua, and you think Joshua came out of Ephraim, and look at a lot of the different judges, they came out of Ephraim. And Ephraim, who was Ephraim? Ephraim was the son of Joseph, right? And Manasseh was also a son of Joseph. And remember, there was no tribe of Joseph. Instead, there were two tribes, right, that came from Joseph, from his sons. That's how Joseph was blessed. And nobody had a more prized land grant than did Ephraim. And so Ephraim has, they've been a little depressed for a while up at Ephraim. They didn't have the authority they once did. A lot of their glory is gone. And Jeroboam's from up there in Ephraim. And he is their man. But I'll tell you this. You ever see people who, for example, in politics and things of that nature, you just can't help but say some are smarter than others? I mean, politics is a game in some ways. And who wins elective office? Usually it's the one who's just a little bit smarter. I mean, you ever look at somebody, you may not agree with somebody's policies, but you say, it's a good politician right there, okay? He's a good politician. I was watching some of these hearings today with Judge Kavanaugh. And, of course, he's being grilled by both parties, the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I listened to the answers that he would give, and I came away with this impression. It didn't make any difference if the senator was a Republican or a Democrat. Judge Kavanaugh was smarter than all of them. I mean, he just was. I mean, he knew his stuff. And so, you got to be prepared when you go before an audience like that. And regardless of what one may think of his judicial philosophy, he was prepared. He knew how to answer. Now, old Jeroboam is just smarter than Rehoboam. You want to see this? Jeroboam is smarter than Rehoboam. And he knows how he's going to take the kingdom. Although his fault is this, he's not going to let God just bring it to him. That's what God wants to do. David just let God bring it to him. But Jeroboam's of that mindset, well, if I'm going to be the king, then I'm going to go about taking it for myself. Well, Solomon, at some point, finds out all that Jeroboam's doing, and so Solomon feels threatened, and he says, I'll tell you what we're going to do. He says, we're going to get rid of Jeroboam. Now think about this just for a moment. When Solomon says that, he is throwing his fist in the hand of the Almighty, isn't he? You think about that. Here's what happens. Jeroboam flees to Egypt with King Shishak, the Pharaoh down there. He flees for his life. Because Solomon says, I'm going to kill Jeroboam because Jeroboam wants my job. Jeroboam wants my job. He wants to be king. But God's already said, Solomon, your time's over. The kingdom is going to be rent asunder. And here we have Solomon not convinced, right? He's still fighting to remain king. God's already said, you're going to be king when you die. But after you're dead, the kingdom's going to be divided in two. You can't fight it. And so Jeroboam flees for his life down to Egypt, and there he stays, kind of quiet, doesn't he? This is what you call exile, isn't it? Exile. I can remember, many of you remember, some of you remember, back when the Iranian Revolution took place.
Called the Red Wave.
The Shah was deposed, and the Shah, of course, he was not the most fair ruler, and yet he was friendly toward America. And eventually he found asylum, I believe, in Egypt. But the Shah was deposed. And I can still remember as a teenager watching the news and seeing that bearded man with the long robes. He was a cleric, a religious leader. He was the Ayatollah Khomeini. Remember? And he'd been where? In exile. And he was brought out. Okay? Then in a different scenario, you remember when Nelson Mandela of South Africa was brought from prison as apartheid came to an end in South Africa, and then he ultimately was elected president. All throughout history, even during our times, we've heard of these people who've been imprisoned, who've been exiled, and they're brought out, and at the right time, what's Jeroboam doing? He's just waiting, isn't he? He's biding his time. And the time finally comes. What happens? Solomon, the king, is dead. And what does Jeroboam do? Jeroboam is headed to Jerusalem. Jeroboam is going to go and take his kingship, but he's smarter than Rehoboam in this. He's going to let the people decide. Okay? Now remember, God's behind this whole thing. God's allowing this to happen. God is going to use the foolishness of Rehoboam to do what he says he wants done. The kingdom divided in two. And so what you have is, you have Jeroboam returning to Jerusalem after Solomon has died. And so then we pick up in chapter 12 with Rehoboam, after having been anointed king, decides to go up where? Shechem, doesn't he? He's going to go up to Shechem because there he's going to be anointed again, so that the northern tribes can see this. So everybody can know that this man, Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, is going to be king. Now, Rehoboam is despotic. He is a tyrant. His father, who wandered away from God, whose heart was led astray by many strange women, and with all those foreign alliances that he made, had become dull in heart. He had compelled the people to excessive labor. He was charging them with high taxes. And so Jeroboam then, he decides that he is going to play this out just right. And so let's look at verse 1 of chapter 12. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel will come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass when Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the present King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that they sent and called him. Jeroboam, it's time. Solomon's dead. Come on back. And so Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying this, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father and his heavy yoke, which he put upon us lighter, and we will serve thee. So Jeroboam's with the people up there at Shechem as King Rehoboam is being anointed. Now all King Rehoboam wants is for the people to bow down and say, yes, we support you as king, and then you can go back down to Jerusalem and know full well we're going to stand behind you. And so Jeroboam doesn't make any threat, does he? The older men, or rather the men of Israel, would make a request. Okay? Now, thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore make thou the grievous service of thy father, and his heavy yoke which he put upon us, lighter. And if you do that, we'll gladly serve you. Okay? We will serve you. And so he said unto them, Depart yet for 3 days, and come again to me. And the people departed. That's because King Rehoboam can't make a decision. He doesn't know how to lead. So here's the request. King Rehoboam does not know how to answer it. So he says, give me 3 days. Let me go consult people. See, all he's ever done is lazied around the palace and enjoyed all of the wealth of his daddy. He doesn't know anything about leadership. Now let's put this in a political climate again. If you've got some fellow over here who has succeeded to political office based upon his daddy and his granddaddy, they all had it before, and then he just expects it to be his, and he doesn't pay any attention to labor. He doesn't pay any attention to business. It's just like, this is just owed to me. And then you've got somebody who's a pretty good politician who comes along and he stirs up the populace. And he says, this isn't right. I'm fighting for the people. We don't have to stand this. And all of a sudden, Rehoboam hears what these people are saying. He doesn't know what to do. Sometimes, when something would happen in Mayberry, North Carolina, Andy might be pretty cool about it, but Barney would say this, we got a situation. I mean, we got a situation. And Rehoboam's now going to these advisors, we got a situation. These people, who I thought just bowed down to whatever I told them, are not reacting that way. So, notice, King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived and said, how do you advise that I may answer this people? Now, old people don't always have the answer, but more likely they will have the right answer compared to the younger. Not always. There was the old prophet who gave bad advice. But it pays to listen to older people who've what? Had some more experience. Okay? And the older people said, if you'll be a servant to this people, and you'll serve them and answer them, speak good words to them, they'll be your servants forever. Now, is that just good advice? That's good advice, isn't it? If you're going to be a leader, then be sure you're on the side of the people, because they can depose you. And so, that's what they told him. But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they'd given him, consulted with the younger men that were grown up with him. These must be just a bunch of party boys like he was. What do you mean? What do you mean that they said that they'll, if you do this, then they will serve you? Well, they said, here's what you need to say to them. The young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, verse 10, thus shalt thou speak unto this people that spake unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, here comes a little proverb, my little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. In other words, you ain't seen nothing yet. You come to me saying you want me to make it lighter? I'm not going to make it lighter. My father chastised you with whips. Just think now if those whips have scorpions at the end. I'll chastise you with scorpions, and then you'll know who's boss. And so it is. Whereas my father did lade you with heavy yoke, I'll add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, I'll chastise you with scorpions. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had appointed, saying, come to me again the third day. Now here's Jeroboam, the populist, out there with the people. Now think about it. Jeroboam already knows he's going to get these 10 tribes. But he's playing a coup. And the text says that the people were treated roughly. And so he spake to them after the counsel of the young men, and he said, my father made your yoke heavy. He said, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastised you with whips, but I'll chastise you with scorpions. Wherefore the king hearkened not to the people, verse 15, for the cause was from the Lord. Now pay attention to that. The Lord is using the foolishness of Solomon to accomplish his will. Don't ever let the Lord use your foolishness or my foolishness to accomplish his will. He knew it, can't he? He knew it. And so the Lord is causing all this in the sense that it's his will this be done. He's just letting this play out. Because he's already said the kingdom is going to be taken from Solomon. And the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam. And so, and that's just reassuring Jeroboam what the Lord said is about to take place. So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king. They said, and remember, a lot of these folks are Ephraim, who already upset about David, his line, and Jerusalem and Judah. And when the people heard this, they answered the king, saying, what portion have we in David? Have we inheritance in the son of Jesse? To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel parted their tents. If that's how it's going to be, we don't have any portion in Israel. We're through with Israel. We've heard what you said, Rehoboam. And what? We don't have to take it. We've had enough. We're rebelling. And all of this is accomplishing exactly what God spoke through Ahijah the prophet out there to Jeroboam in the field, and what God said to Solomon, that the kingdom's going to be rent. It's going to be accomplished. So when we see the division of the kingdom, who's responsible? Well, you've got Solomon for all his sins. And then Jeroboam plays a role. And Rehoboam plays a role. And there's Ephraim that plays a role. Because Ephraim, you know, when the capital city for the northern kingdoms is founded, it will be there in Shechem, at least for a while. Later on, it'll be in Samaria. But Ephraim rises above all the other tribes, and therefore they're going to be a collective group. Now there will be some, as you'll see later, that will remain from all the tribes that will be down there in Judah, because Jeroboam is going to corrupt the people. He's not going to remain. He's not going to be faithful to God, okay? Even though God has used Jeroboam to accomplish this particular purpose. But I want us to notice, as we think about who was responsible for the division, you ultimately say God was. Okay? I preach a sermon sometimes from Psalm 22, and it's an Old Testament Calvary. That's what I call it. Because when you study Psalm 22, you think you're sitting at the feet of Jesus while he's on the cross. And I say, who's responsible for Jesus' death? He suffered by the hellish hands of Satan. He suffered by the hateful hands of men. And he suffered by the holy hand of God. For it is stated in Acts chapter 2, Jesus died by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, right? God allowed it to happen. Is his will. So it is right here. And so it cannot, this cannot be. Now, what happens is this. Rehoboam, what does he want to do? He wants to go fight. He's not going to fight. That's not going to happen. Shemaiah, the prophet, would come and these words would be spoken. Do not go up nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. Return every man to his house, for this thing is from me. This thing is from me. And they hearken therefore to the word of the Lord, return to depart according to the word of the Lord. Now here's the point. Don't go fight because this is from me. I've already determined it. I want to close by saying this. There are times when the Lord has determined something, and it might as well be accepted. When God no longer approved Saul, Samuel kept whining about it, didn't he? And finally God told Samuel, you need to get over it. I'm through with Saul. And Samuel had to get over it. And then in 1 Corinthians, or 2 Corinthians 12, remember 3 times what did Paul do? He approached God, said, take this thorn in the flesh away from it. No, my grace is sufficient. I'm going to do it. And here we have the people, or rather Rehoboam, who says, I'm going to fight these people. And God says, no, you're not. It's already been determined. The kingdom is divided. Jeroboam, he'll have 10 tribes. 2 will belong to primarily the house of Judah, will belong to Rehoboam. And then we're going to see how all that unfolds. All right? But the thing to remember, as always, God's in control of it all, isn't he? One thing, remember, one thing God never says. Nothing takes him by surprise, does it?